My name is Jonathan, and for over 20 years I believe that my marriage to Laura was anchored in mutual respect, shared dreams, and a love that had weathered life's many storms. Our home was once a sanctuary filled with laughter, quiet mornings over coffee, and nights spent discussing our hopes for the future. I trusted Laura implicitly, convinced that the life we built was as strong as the promises we made to each other. Yet, as life sometimes reveals its harshest truths in the most unexpected ways, I was about to learn that everything I believed in was nothing more than a fragile illusion. It began with subtle changes that I initially dismissed as the natural evolution of a long marriage. Laura started receiving more phone calls late at night, calls she hurriedly ended before I could glimpse the screen. I noticed her spending longer hours on her computer and growing increasingly distant, as if a part of her had slipped away into a secret world. I tried to chalk these off as trivial matters, perhaps work stress or old friends reaching out. But a gnawing feeling in the pit of my stomach warned me that something was terribly amiss. One evening, after returning home early from a business trip, I found the house unusually quiet. The comforting hum of our shared life was replaced by an eerie silence that made my heart race. As I walked through the living room, my eyes caught a glimpse of a familiar envelope lying carelessly on the coffee table. The envelope was not addressed to me, but rather bore Laura's handwriting and a single, damning note. "I've made my choice." I felt my world shatter as I picked it up, my hands trembling uncontrollably. The note was cryptic yet devastating, and it was only the beginning. In the days that followed, I began to uncover fragments of evidence that painted a grim picture of deceit. I discovered receipts for expensive dinners at upscale restaurants that I had never been to, along with a series of text messages and emails between Laura and a man I came to know was her former lover. The messages were laced with passion and longing, and they detailed secret rendezvous and plans that I had never been a part of. I spent countless sleepless nights poring over these digital clues, each one chiseling away at the foundation of trust on which our marriage had been built. But the most devastating revelation came one fateful afternoon when I returned home unexpectedly. In the quiet of our bedroom, I found Laura cradling a newborn in her arms. A baby with my son's eyes, but the unmistakable features of someone else. Time seemed to stand still as the gravity of the situation hit me like a tidal wave. Laura's infidelity was no longer an abstract betrayal. It had produced a living, breathing consequence, a child born of an affair that I had never imagined. The shock was paralyzing, and I stood there frozen in disbelief as the reality of the situation unfurled before me. Every moment we had shared, the laughter, the whispered secrets, the promises made in the silence of our bed, now felt tainted by this unthinkable deception. I realized that the betrayal ran deeper than I could have ever imagined. Not only had my wife broken our sacred vows, but she had also chosen to bring a fragment of that betrayal into our home. The baby, innocent and unaware, was living proof of a love that I had never been a part of, a constant, painful reminder of a life that was built on lies. In that moment, I knew I had to make a choice. The evidence of Laura's infidelity was undeniable, and the pain it caused was too immense to simply ignore. I refused to sign the birth certificate, a symbolic act that would have legitimized a betrayal I could not accept. The very thought of endorsing this false life, born of deceit, filled me with a cold, unyielding resolve. I realized that I had a responsibility, not only to myself but also to the truth, to stand against this betrayal, regardless of the heartbreak it would bring. The hours that followed were a blur of raw emotion. I spent that night in a state of numb shock, writing furiously in my journal, desperately trying to capture the storm of emotions that threatened to overwhelm me. Each word was a cry for justice, a plea for understanding in a world that had suddenly turned cruel and unfamiliar. I questioned every moment of our life together, wondering if I had missed subtle signs of her disloyalty, if there were moments when I had chosen ignorance over confrontation. The pain was all-consuming, and the betrayal felt like an open wound that refused to heal. As dawn broke the following day, I made a silent vow to myself. I would no longer allow this treachery to define me. I would face the painful truth head-on, and I would seek answers, even if the cost was the complete dissolution of the love I once knew. I began to prepare for a confrontation with Laura. knowing that the discussion would be one of the most excruciating moments of my life. I gathered every piece of evidence I could find, the messages, the receipts, the photograph of her with the baby, and I steeled myself for what lay ahead. In the quiet solitude of that morning, with the rising sun casting long shadows across the floor, I realized that the path before me was fraught with heartbreak and bitter revelations. Yet, I also recognized that in confronting the betrayal, I might find a way to reclaim my dignity and rebuild my life from the ruins. I took a deep breath, closed my journal, and resolved that today would be the day I confront the woman who had shattered my world, even as I struggled to come to terms with the fact that a piece of that betrayal now lived in the form of a child I never wished for. The day of the confrontation arrived with a mix of dread and a grim determination. I arranged to meet Laura at a modest restaurant, a place we had once frequented together in happier times. As I sat alone at a corner table, the memories of our past mingled with the present reality, and my heart pounded in my chest with every tick of the clock. I rehearsed the words I would say, each one laden with the weight of betrayal and the anguish of a shattered life. When Laura finally walked in, she appeared smaller than I remembered, her eyes haunted by remorse and a sense of resignation. The familiarity of her face clashed painfully with the knowledge of her actions. We exchanged a few strained greetings before I launched into the confrontation, my voice low and trembling with barely contained emotion. "Laura," I began, struggling to keep my composure, "I need to know why. Why did you do this? How could you bring this child into our world, knowing the pain it would cause?" My words felt like weapons, each one aimed at unmasking the truth that had been hidden for too long. Laura's eyes filled with tears as she hesitated, as if the very act of speaking her truth would shatter her completely. After a long, agonizing pause, she spoke in a voice choked with sorrow. I'm sorry, Jonathan," she whispered. "I never meant to hurt you." I felt lost, and when Mark came back into my life, everything changed. I thought that I could have both, a life with you and a rekindled love that made me feel alive again. Her confession was a brutal admission that pierced the silence between us. The man I had trusted, my closest friend, had been the catalyst for a passion that led her astray, and the consequence was the birth of a child who embodied that betrayal. As she spoke, the full weight of her words crashed over me. I remembered the evidence I had found, the intimate messages, the clandestine meetings, and the photographs that confirmed what I had long feared. I recalled the cold, unyielding moment when I discovered her with the baby, a moment that had forever altered the course of my life. Now, in the soft, dim light of the restaurant, all those memories converged, leaving me breathless and numb. "I can't sign the birth certificate," I said, my voice breaking with a mixture of fury and despair. "I cannot in good conscience validate this life, a life that was born out of betrayal, out of a love that you abandoned us for." My words, though measured, carried an intensity that shook the very air around us. The room seemed to close in as I stared into her tearful eyes, searching for any hint of remorse or understanding. Instead, I saw only the reflection of the choices that had led us to this moment, a moment of irreversible loss. Laura tried to explain further, her voice pleading and weak. "Jonathan, I never wanted to hurt you. I was confused, and in the heat of those moments, I made choices I can't take back. I still love you in my own way." Her words faltered as I interrupted her, unable to bear any more of the deluge of justifications. "Love," I repeated bitterly. "Is this what you call love? Love that abandons its vows, that creates a living reminder of your infidelity?" My voice, thick with anger and heartbreak, resonated in the quiet space between us. The customers around us seemed to fade away as I confronted the painful truth. Laura had not only betrayed me, but she had also shattered the sanctity of our family with every lie, every secret meeting, and every tender moment shared with Mark. For a long while, we sat in silence, the weight of our broken promises hanging heavily in the air. I felt as if time itself had stopped, leaving me suspended in a moment of pure agony. I could see the anguish in Laura's eyes, the regret that stemmed from a decision made in a moment of weakness. But it was too late for regrets. The child in her arms, and the child that would soon bear her name on a birth certificate I refused to sign, was a permanent testament to that betrayal. I left the restaurant that day feeling numb and broken. Every step I took was laden with the unbearable knowledge that my life had been forever altered. The image of Laura's tearful eyes and the memory of her confession would haunt me for years to come. I returned to an empty home, where every corner echoed with the ghost of a love that had once been, and where the thought of a future with that child felt like a betrayal of everything I once believed in. That night, I sat alone in the dark, surrounded by the remnants of our shared life. I picked up my journal and began to write, a desperate, cathartic outpouring of pain, anger, and disbelief. I wrote of the betrayal, of the shattered trust, and of the unfathomable loss that had become my reality. Each word was a struggle to reclaim the dignity and self-respect that had been so cruelly stripped away. I vowed that I would never sign away my truth, that I would stand by the painful knowledge of what had happened, even if it meant facing a future devoid of the love I once knew. As the night wore on, I understood that the road ahead would be long and arduous. The confrontation had marked not just the end of our marriage, but the beginning of a painful journey of self-discovery and resilience. I resolved that I would find a way to heal, even as I carried the scars of this betrayal deep within my soul. The truth was out, and no amount of denial could change the reality of what had transpired. I knew that my life would never be the same again, and that the choices made on that fateful day would cast a long shadow over everything that followed. In the days that followed the confrontation, the raw wounds of betrayal began to manifest in ways I could scarcely have anticipated. The pain of Laura's infidelity was now compounded by another gut-wrenching revelation. Our daughter, Sophie, had learned about the affair in a manner that shattered the innocence of our family. One rainy afternoon, as I sat in the solitude of my study trying to piece together my broken heart, Sophie approached me with tears glistening in her eyes and a voice heavy with sorrow. "Dad, can I talk to you?" she asked timidly, her usually cheerful tone replaced by an almost eerie quietness. I looked up from my journal, already bracing myself for what I knew was coming. With a trembling voice, she began to recount what she had overheard, a conversation between Laura and one of her friends, in which Laura had confessed that Mark was not just a passing interest, but the man she truly loved. The phrase "true love" rang out, each syllable cutting through the fragile remnants of my composure. Sophie's confession was a blow that reverberated through every corner of my shattered heart. Here was my daughter, so young and yet already forced to confront the painful realities of betrayal, bearing witness to the truth that I had long dreaded. I felt a crushing mix of sorrow and anger as I realized that the consequences of Laura's choices had seeped into the very foundation of our family. Sophie's innocent eyes, wide with a mixture of fear and confusion, pleaded silently for an explanation that I could not provide. In that moment, the full scope of the devastation became painfully clear. The betrayal was not contained solely within the confines of my relationship with Laura. It had spread like a poison throughout our family, infecting the bonds that held us together. I cradled Sophie's hand, trying to offer comfort even as my own heart ached with an indescribable grief. I assured her that we would get through this, even as I struggled to understand how a love that once promised safety and warmth could transform into a weapon that cut so deeply. In the ensuing days, our home became a battleground of silent accusations and sorrowful tears. I found myself questioning every memory, every promise that had once seemed so unbreakable. I retreated into my journal once more, writing fervently about the crushing weight of betrayal and the unbearable pain of knowing that the woman I loved had not only abandoned our vows, but had also dragged our daughter into the dark legacy of infidelity. Each line I penned was a desperate plea for clarity, a hope that someday the shattered pieces of our family might be mended. Yet even in the midst of such overwhelming despair, I sensed a fragile spark of resolve emerging. Sophie's quiet strength in the face of this heartbreak stirred something deep within me, a determination to shield her from the full brunt of the pain and to forge a future where honesty, however painful, would be the only truth. I made a silent promise to myself that I would work to rebuild the trust that had been so ruthlessly broken, not just for my own sake, but for the sake of our daughter who deserved a future free from the toxic legacy of betrayal. That afternoon, as the rain hammered against the windows and the sky wept for our shattered family, I sat with Sophie at the kitchen table. I took her hand and looked into her tear-filled eyes, speaking softly about love, trust, and the complexities of the human heart. I explained that sometimes the people we love make choices that we can never understand, and that while those choices can leave deep scars, they do not have to define us. My voice wavered with emotion as I promised her that I would always be there, to protect her, to guide her, and to ensure that she never lost sight of the truth. Over the next few weeks, the echoes of that painful confession continued to reverberate through our home. I sought out therapy, both for myself and for Sophie, hoping that professional guidance might help us navigate the labyrinth of emotions that now defined our lives. The sessions were painful and raw, a mirror to the chaos of our hearts, yet slowly, they began to offer a pathway toward healing. I learned that forgiveness was not an act of forgetting, but rather a process of reclaiming one's power and rebuilding trust, step by agonizing step. As I looked back on the tumultuous events of the past months, the discovery of the affair, the devastating confrontation, and the heart-rending confession from my daughter, I realized that our family had been irrevocably altered. The child born from Laura's betrayal, the refusal to sign a birth certificate that would validate that painful legacy, and the emotional scars that now marked our lives were all part of a truth I could no longer deny. Yet, amid the sorrow, I also recognized the need to move forward, to find a way to honor the love that once bound us while forging a new path defined by resilience and hard-won wisdom. Sophie's unwavering honesty and the quiet courage with which she faced our broken reality inspired me to confront my own pain. I began to write again, not just in my journal, but by sharing my story with others who might one day walk a similar path. In those words, I found a measure of catharsis, a way to transform my grief into a beacon of hope for a future where trust might someday be rebuilt. That rainy afternoon, as I held Sophie's hand and looked into her eyes, I made a vow that no matter how deep the betrayal, I would not let it extinguish the light within our family. The journey ahead was uncertain, the scars would remain, but together, we would learn to live with the truth, to rebuild our lives one careful step at a time. The pain of betrayal was a burden I would carry forever, but I also believed it could serve as a catalyst for growth, a reminder that even in the depths of heartbreak, there exists the potential for renewal and redemption. In the months following the storm of betrayal, my world was a landscape marked by raw wounds and tentative hope, a place where the pain of the past mingled with the possibility of a new beginning. I refused to sign the birth certificate for the child that was the living symbol of Laura's infidelity. That refusal became my final act of defiance against a betrayal that had upended every aspect of my life. But even as I stood by that decision, I knew that the road ahead would be long and arduous, a journey in which the scars of betrayal would forever serve as both a reminder of the past and a catalyst for personal renewal. The days after the confrontation were filled with a haunting emptiness. I spent long hours in solitude, wandering through the familiar rooms of our once happy home, each corner echoing with memories of laughter and love that now seemed like distant, shattered dreams. The decision not to sign the birth certificate was not born of a desire for revenge, but from a deep need to protect myself from the painful validation of a betrayal I could never accept. It was a symbol, a declaration that I would not allow my identity to be forever intertwined with the legacy of infidelity. I sought solace in therapy and support groups, meeting others whose lives had been scarred by the wounds of betrayal. In these sessions, I learned that healing is a slow, unsteady process, a gradual journey of confronting the past, forgiving oneself, and finding the strength to move forward. I came to understand that my refusal was not a rejection of the child's existence, but rather an acknowledgement that the pain and deception that birthed that life could never be ignored. It was a bitter pill to swallow, yet an essential step in reclaiming my dignity. Throughout this period, I tried to rebuild my sense of self. I revisited old hobbies that had once filled my days with purpose and began to forge new connections with friends and mentors who reminded me that I was more than the sum of my heartbreak. Each small victory, a morning run in the crisp air, a quiet evening spent reading, a shared smile with a kind stranger, became a brick in the foundation of a new life. I discovered that while the betrayal had left an indelible mark on my soul, it had also awakened a resilience I never knew I possessed. My daughter Sophie remained my steadfast beacon through it all. Despite the pain that the truth had inflicted upon her, she exhibited a maturity and compassion beyond her years. We spent hours talking about our dreams for the future, about how we could redefine our family on our own terms. I promised her that I would always be there to guide her, to protect her innocence, and to ensure that we both learned from this painful chapter. In those moments, the hope of renewal began to shine through the darkness, a quiet determination to rebuild a life defined not by betrayal, but by honesty, strength, and the possibility of forgiveness. I eventually reached out to Laura, not to seek reconciliation, but to understand the depths of her own regret and to let her know that the consequences of her choices were irrevocable. Our conversations were fraught with tension and sorrow, and while they did not offer the solace of mutual understanding, they did mark the beginning of a slow process of separation. I made it clear that I would not sign any document that legitimized the legacy of her infidelity, that my future would be defined by my own truth and not by the painful mistakes of the past. The path forward was never smooth. There were days when the memories of betrayal would overwhelm me, when the bitter taste of lost love would make every step feel like a monumental struggle. Yet, with each passing day, I found that the intensity of my grief began to wane, replaced by a cautious optimism that whispered of new beginnings. I learned that renewal does not mean erasing the past. It means integrating the pain into a narrative of survival, of growth, and of the enduring strength of the human spirit. Now, as I stand on the threshold of a future that remains uncertain yet filled with possibility, I choose to embrace the lessons of this heart-wrenching journey. I know that the scars of betrayal will forever be a part of me, but they do not have to define who I become. With every sunrise, I commit to moving forward, rebuilding my life, nurturing the bonds with my daughter, and finding a way to let the light of hope gradually dispel the darkness of the past. In the end, I have come to understand that true renewal is not measured by the erasure of pain, but by the courage to face it, to learn from it, and to grow stronger in its wake. I refuse to sign the birth certificate as an act of reclaiming my own narrative, a declaration that I would not let the legacy of infidelity dictate my future. Though the road remains long and the wounds still ache, I walk forward with the quiet determination of a man who has survived the unthinkable and who now dares to dream of a life rebuilt on his own terms.